Chapter 20. The Heist, Part 1. The next morning, Cass made a solemn confession to her mother. She wanted to return the mummy, she said, but her friend refused to admit they had taken it. Technically, you might notice this was true. She did want to return the mummy. Unfortunately, she didn't have it. Likewise, her friends did refuse to admit they'd taken the mummy, because in fact they had it. She told her mom that she was going to spend time with Max Ernst and Yoji after school in order to try and persuade them to do the right thing. Max Ernst and Yoji told their parents more or less the same thing, i.e., they wanted to return the mummy, but their friends refused to admit they'd taken it. The story was that they would be working on their graduation speech in the public library. They were packing snacks and they wouldn't be home until dinner time. The time frame was optimistic, and there was a very good chance they wouldn't be home until late that night, or maybe ever, but they figured that was the latest hour they could name without further explanation. As soon as they got to the library, they went into their respective bathrooms to change. Cass was the last to come out, tugging on her dress so that it would stay where it was supposed to. That's right, her dress. Let that sink in for a moment. Cass in a dress. And did I mention she was wearing lipstick, pink lipstick? Had she lost her mind, undergone a religious conversion? Actually, she was in disguise. All three of them had adopted disguises of one sort or another. They weren't exactly expecting to see wanted posters with their photographs hanging on every wall of the museum, but they figured the disguises might buy them some time should they be spotted by Albert 3D, or one of the security personnel they'd met previously. Also, the disguise might help keep them from being recognized if they were caught on surveillance video again. Not would help, might help. Don't say anything, said Cass before either of the friends could speak. I know I look ridiculous. I mean ridiculous. My mom bought me this dress for graduation, but in no way am I wearing it then. It's nice, said Yoji. Yeah, nice, agreed Max Ernst, although he wasn't sure whether Yoji might mean nice in a you look nice, or nice in a nice disguise, or nice as in not nice at all. Just don't let anybody see your fingernails, said Yoji, snickering. They kind of give you away. Her ears reddening, Cass glanced at her nails for a second. Yoji was right. They still looked raw and ragged from all the chewing, not very girlish at all. Well, at least I don't look like some kind of hipster raver clown, she said, hiding her fingernails in her fists. Max Ernst snorted. Yoji had simply dressed in one of his everyday outfits, which today consisted of neon yellow sneakers, skinny black jeans, and an acid green t-shirt, and an orange baseball cap on top of his blue streaked hair, not exactly inconspicuous. The only addition to his everyday attire, a pair of 1950s Wayfair-style sunglasses and a camera around his neck. You just don't get it, said Yoji. I'm dressed as a Japanese tourist. You are a Japanese tourist, Max Ernst pointed out. Yeah, but not that kind, said Yoji. It's like if you dressed as a nerd on purpose. What do you mean? Well, you are a nerd, right? But you're cool. I am? Max Ernst couldn't have been more surprised if Yoji had told him he was supposed to have antlers. Well, not that cool, Yoji amended. I mean, you're not like one of those cool nerds, that's a whole other thing. Max Ernst had employed the props at his disposal, a pair of wireframe eyeglasses and a fake mustache. They were left over from Halloween when he dressed as Sherlock Holmes' partner, Dr. Watson. Cass had vetoed his original costume, Sherlock Holmes, on the basis that Max Ernst could promote something as carcinogenic as pipe smoking. The mustache wasn't quite as preposterous looking as you might imagine. It matched his hair color and wasn't overly bushy. To their credit, Cass and Yoji refrained from making fun of him almost. You're supposed to be a midget, right? Asked Yoji, like from the circus. That's rude, Cass admonished. They're called little people, remember? After enduring a few more jibes, Max Ernst peeled off the mustache but kept the glasses. That's better, said Yoji. Now you're going for a nerdy nerd. Max Ernst nodded, uncertain whether this was a compliment. As luck would have it, actually there was nothing lucky about it. They had planned it that way. The public library was only a block away from their real destination, the Natural History Museum. Specifically the restoration room, where they had hoped to find the mummy's finger, still sitting in the shoebox high on the shelf, squeezed between two urns. They stopped just before they reached the museum's front steps. Yoji squinted under his sunglasses. Who are those dudes? Across the street stood men in white turbans and robes. They shook bells and tambourines and held handmade signs, like protesters of a political event. The mummy rise, free Amun now. The priests of Amun are watching. Maximus frowned. How can Amun be freed? He's a mummy, plus he's already broken out. Come on, guys, said Cass. Forget about them. They're just some kind of wacky cult. It's time to go steal the finger. For the first time they visited the museum, they were on a field trip. The second time, they were working there. Neither time had they paid admissions. It was something of a shock to find themselves lining up at the front desk to buy tickets. The price of the 3 student tickets, $18. What they had between them, $9.35. We could try paying with gold, said Cass. She had stashed a few of the Jester's gold coins in the bottom of her backpack for emergencies. In the event of an all-out nuclear war or some kind of global disaster, paper money would promptly be worthless. Cass thought gold was much more likely to maintain its value. It's okay, we can pay what we want, said Maximus, scrutinizing the writing above the desk. Look, recommended donation, how about that? As it turned out, Maximus was correct. Although the man selling tickets was directly unhappy about it, don't come back, he said under his breath as he took $1 for the 3 tickets. The museum didn't close until 5 p.m. That meant they had an hour and a half to kill, exploring the museum and trying their best to blend in with the ordinary visitors. They lingered the longest in the rocks and minerals room, as it was the darkest part of the museum, and the better to show off the crystals and geodes under the spotlights. They had figured it was where they were least likely to be recognized or caught on camera. As a side benefit, Cass was able to compare the gems to the show with the raw gems she'd found in the Jester's trunk. She determined that the gems were most likely garnet and not, as she first thought, rubies. As they walked around, they discussed where to hide at closing time. This would be the most treacherous moment in their day, when they were most likely to be herded out with the other minglers, or worse, identified as thieves planning to purloin an ancient artifact from the museum. Their first thought, inspired by a certain book they'd all read, was to hide in the bathroom, standing on the toilets in case somebody looked under the stall doors. But experience at school had taught them that there was a good chance the janitor might start cleaning the toilets immediately after the museum closed. And if they weren't clean, then yuck. They decided against the bathrooms. Likewise, they decided against trash cans. None were big enough to hide inside. The animal dioramas all were locked. Finally, they settled on a spot they knew best. It meant return to the mummy exhibit, and it would be snug for the 3 of them to say the least, but who would look there? After all, it was already known to be empty. The priest of Amun notwithstanding, the mummy rising from the dead is generally a one-time only event. On reflection, Dr. Amun's sarcophagus was the perfect hiding spot. As exactly 5 minutes before 5, after they'd all availed themselves to their last opportunity to use the bathroom, they entered the mummy exhibit for what was expected to be the last time. It was the last hour of the last day of the show, and the gallery was extremely crowded. This was a good thing and a bad thing. Good because they were immediately camouflaged by the multitude of museum visitors. Bad because there was no way to slip into the mummy's chambers without being seen. Unlike the cost of the tickets, the crowd problem hadn't caught our young, aspiring museum robbers by surprise. A diversion was called for, and they were experts on creating diversions. It hadn't been long, after all, since Maxers had staged an epileptic fit so matchful, authentic, that it brought the hospital emergency room to a halt. Cass nodded discreetly in the direction of the security guard watching over the mummy exhibit. The guard was somebody they'd seen before but had never met. There was a decent chance she would recognize them. It was risky to interact with her, but they had no choice if they were to proceed with their plan. They needed to get her out of the room, and then draw the crowd's attention away from the mummy's chamber long enough for them to sneak into the chamber and lie down in the sarcophagus. About 1.5 minutes in all, they estimated. Yoji and Maximus nodded back. The plan was a go. Maximus looked at his watch and then started counting down with his fingers. 3, 2, 1. Time to move. As the 3 friends separated, taking their respective positions across the mummy's exhibit main room, they held their breath. They weren't entirely inexperienced when it came to criminal activity. As you may recall, in the course of their past adventures, they'd been forced to acquire certain necessary objects throughout. Let's say creative methods. Nonetheless, they'd never robbed a museum before, and they couldn't help feeling more than a little anxiety about the job ahead. A museum robbery is the kind of thing you see on the news. You don't necessarily expect to be involved in one yourself. The fact that they were intended to return the mummy's finger later, reattach the missing mummy, might or might not have justified their actions on a moral level, but it didn't make what they were doing any less terrifying. Their plan had two parts. First, Yoji uncapped the water bottle and stealthily emptied it next to his foot, creating a large puddle on the marble floor. Before anybody noticed the puddle, he walked quickly to an animal section of the exhibit and pretended to examine a display of a mummified cat. Only after staring at the display for a moment did he realize the cat was missing. All the animal mummies had been packed in crates and were lined up against the wall in preparation for the exhibit's move to Las Vegas. He glanced around happily, nodded. Nobody had seen his mistake. Meanwhile, Cass was most fully disguised of the three of them, had hopefully and hardest to recognize, ran up to the guard. "Excuse me, ma'am," Cass said in a polite but urgent voice. "Somebody spilled water over there." She pointed across the room to a spill just visible between the legs of the museum goers. The guard shrugged. "The show closes in 5 minutes. "Yes, and that's more than enough time for somebody to slip," said Cass firmly. "I guess you're right." Giving Cass an evil look, the guard sighed and reached for her walkie-talkie. Uh-oh, thought Cass. Instead of leaving the room, the guard was going to call for help. Thinking fast, Cass shook her head. "You better go get a mop right now. It could take forever for a janitor to get here. In the meantime, any of those people could fall and fracture their wrists, or even suffer a traumatic head injury." The guard hesitated, not wanting to leave her post. "Think about the lawsuit. You could lose your job," urged Cass. Go. There's not a second to lose." Now seriously worried, the guard nodded and ran off. Cass breathed a sigh of relief. Max Ernst was initiating phase 2 of their plan, the stink bomb. It happens occasionally when you take care of a baby for long stretches of time. Max Ernst had earlier that afternoon found a full diaper balled up inside his backpack. He'd been about to drop it into the trash can when Cass stopped him. They might have used for something smellier later. It worked beautifully. The diaper had been festering in the Ziploc bag for several days, and when Max Ernst opened the bag, he could almost feel the smell sapping him in the face. People started looking around nervously, wondering who or what had caused the terrible stench. The smell filled the room. Visitors filed out as fast as they could. There was a momentary scare when Cass had warned might happen. Somebody slipped on the marble. Luckily, it was a young man who quickly regained his balance and walked out with nothing bruised but an ego. Cass, Max Ernst, and Yoji held their noses until the last person left the room. Then Max Ernst hastily closed the Ziploc bag and tossed it into the waste bin. He had no intention of using the stink bomb a second time. Wordlessly, the three friends darted over to the mummy's chamber and let themselves in. Because the sarcophagus had been built to hold a coffin, which in turn had been built to hold another coffin, which in turn had built to hold another coffin, the container was quite large. The bottom of the sarcophagus was covered in a layer of sand. However, they had to shift around a bit to get down far enough to feel safe from detection. It was a difficult operation for the three people to perform at once. Without thinking about it, they fell into their usual formation from the school bus, with Yoji stretched out on one side and Max Ernst and Cass scrunched up on the other. It wasn't the most comfortable hiding place in the world, but it's not terrible considering. "So far, so good," whispered Max Ernst. "Yeah, nice job, dudes," said Yoji. Cass put her fingers to her lips. It wasn't over yet, but she allowed herself a small smile of victory. And there they lay, like three squirming mummies awaiting their burial.